Welcome everyone to another episode of 10 Minute Poker Tips. Got a special guest today. We got a PLO expert on our hands, Nguyen, also known as Suited Superman. He has a WPT win, but not in PLO, No Limit Hold'em back in 2023. He is a PLO host at the Hustler Casino. So if you want to play some PLO, head on down there and play with Key. So Key, thank you for coming on the show, man.
Hey Derek, thank you for having me.
PLO obviously gotten a lot bigger over the years, but still, I feel like in its infancy, getting all these players to come and play. I'm sure a lot of No Limit Hold'em players and even new players would love to get into PLO, but we're not sure. Maybe we're a little bit intimidated by there's so many cards that we have to deal with instead of just two. So what tips do you have for us today?
Yeah, I keep hearing that people are saying that PLO is a game of the future. In fact, the game's actually been around for quite a while. I think it doesn't catch on as much as Hold'em. Also, like in tournament, it's mostly like Hold'em is the one with the big guarantee, so it's draw people more. And Hold'em is just a lot of people familiar with. It's not easy to take that step to get into PLO. From the player pool at Hustler alone, just seeing players that did take the step of getting their feet wet in PLO, they absolutely love it. And most of them just never go back to playing Hold'em cash game.
Wow.
It's just a huge difference. It's a very different game. It's a lot of action, a lot of swing. So some people are not used to just the amount of hands they're going to be playing. There's a lot of hands you can play in PLO. Hold'em, usually your big pips are probably around 15-20%. In PLO, you could be playing 30-35%.
Wow.
And still very profitable.
Wow.
So yeah, just kind of knowing the differences. If they have some good guidance before they come into the game, that would help. So I would recommend looking for, even online, there's a lot of good advices out there before you jump in. It's actually, in my opinion, is a much more simple game than Hold'em. First of all, you actually have 4 cards in your hand, so you actually have more information about the hand than Hold'em. It's less guessing, and it's a very systematic game. It's a very equity-driven game. It's a very different animal, and even though there's more combinations of cards, there's actually just a simpler game tree. It's actually easy to learn. Once you learn it, it's actually a more relaxing. You're gonna be in a game environment where everyone's gambling, everyone's just like putting money in the pot. You don't see much tanking and too serious of a game like Hold'em. So that's why I love it so much for cash game, especially.
Well, when people are V-pipping so high though, is post-flop like difficult to play because people's ranges are wider? Is that like an adjustment that No Limit Hold'em players need to make?
Yes, post-flop, you need to actually navigate based on a lot of factors. Like in PLO, the nuts just changes so often.
Wow.
So you gotta be prepared to play turns and rivers. Pre-flop selections affect that a lot. Usually when I talk to the player that just came to PLO, there's no chart like Hold'em. You have to group the type of hands into different buckets based on their values, right? The 4 most important things in PLOs are nuttiness, high pairs, connectedness, and suitedness. Those are the 4 important things or the characteristic of your hands. So if you have 2 or 3 of those components, your hand become a good hand to enter flop and to enter the pots. For example, you have suitedness, your hand is double suited, for example, with like connected cards. Those are 2 good components. Or you have big pairs, for example, king, jack, 5 with a suit is a pretty good hand. If you have 2 or 3 of those components, you can actually have a pretty good hands. So there's no really easy way to have a graph like the chart like Hold'em, but you can still learn how to range hands.
No solvers yet.
Yeah, there are solvers out there, but it's not that easy to use. You know, I would suggest just to play using those kind of concepts. And so there's some really good tips for just from the beginner's perspective, right? You get dealt 4 cards in PLO, so make sure you always use 2 cards in your hand and 3 community cards to make the best 5-card hands. So if you have a ace of spade in your hand only, no other spades, and the board is 4 spade, you do not have a flush. So a lot of people make that mistake. And also on board where you have, for example, like trip on the board, if you have like 3-3-3 deuce, for example, you don't have a full house. You just have whatever high card in your hand and you don't have a pair. So small things like that, I think sometimes players that just jump into the games get embarrassed because they don't know how to read hands, but kind of practice that and you'll be fine. Another tips I would say is probably pretty helpful for Hold'em players when they transition over. Aces is not as strong of a hand in PLO. So in Hold'em, usually when you get in aces versus like lower pairs, you get like 80% equity. In PLO, sometimes they only have like 60%. depends on opponent's hands.
Wow.
So it's really not a very overpowered hand, and so play it cautiously, especially when you deep stack. When you multi-way, definitely play cautiously. Kings is not a very strong hand in PLO, so like King versus aces is not a cooler. Yeah, and oftentimes actually, kings are just set mining actually. So it
Wow.
is kind of wild. Yeah, unless
Wow.
you have very good kings, you can stack up like king, king, queen, jack, double suited or something like that. Yeah, don't overplay big pairs. Even post flop, don't overplay hands, especially like a straight, for example. If you have a straight on a board where you don't have any extra outs to improve to the bigger hands, for example, like two pair to make a boat or like a higher card to make a higher straight. Sometimes you could be drawing that, getting free roll by another hand that's having extra outs. So play your straight carefully. If there's a lot of action, don't blow the pot. And then just trying to pay attention to how, like I said, just the board changes in PLO so often. And you also want to learn how to calculate the outs as well, the number of outs in PLO. The concept of the wrap, for example, is different in PLO, where you can actually have cards that wrap around the board where you could have upward of like 20 outs for the straight, for example. Instead
Wow.
of hold'em, you just have maximum of 8 outs for the straight.
Yep.
So that's, yeah, so equity can be very strong in those hands. In some cases, if you have a wrap with a flush draw, for example, you are flipping or actually favored against a set. So yeah, there's a lot of cases that you want to play those hands aggressively with so much equity, and you can win big pots with it.
So it sounds like playing aggressively post flop in PLO, not all the time, obviously, but feels a lot like playing huge draws strongly and then maybe playing weaker made hands passively.
right.
Wow.
Yes, yes. There's a concept in PLO. It depends on the type of hands you have. You want to push or pull your opponent in. So if you're in a multi-way pot or like just pre-flop in general, if you want to enter the pot with a certain type of hands, there's some hands that would be good to actually calling the raise. That's why you see so much multi-way in PLO, because there are hands that you want to keep the worst part of opponent's range in. For example, you have like not suited, kind of like hold'em concept where you sometimes call with like suited aces, and you want to keep like this lowest suit your hands in
Yeah.
to cooler them. So you want to pull people in with those hands. And some hands where, for example, big pairs, you usually want to just 3-bet and go heads up. So push
I
in.
see.
So that's also translates to post flop. You want to, some hands you want to keep your opponents in, and it's a very fun game. Board always changing. It's always like position is very important as well in PLO. Actually important because like when you're in position, your opponent's hand actually more face up in PLO, so you're able to exploit them harder. Some other thing that players struggle when they come to PLO is like you can only bet up to the pot size. So they don't know how to calculate the pot size. The way you think about it is, for example, there's a bet in front of you. You are calling the bet, and then you raising the pot is basically the amount that you call the bet plus the dead money. The shortcut for that is you multiply the last bet 3 times plus the dead money. That will give you the pot size raise. So yeah, you can only raise up to the pot size. So a lot of the time you're going to have pretty good equity to continue in PLO, so you don't get pushed out of pots as much in hold'em. Whereas sometimes you can overbet and get you off a big draw. But in PLO, when you have a big draw, you oftentimes just gonna continue with that pot limits.
So calling stations can rejoice in PLO.
Yeah, it's actually one of those things that people enjoy more because they get to see more turns, more rivers, and the pots get bigger because you're gonna go to turn and river more often and multi-way more often. So yeah, the money moves around a lot, and it's become a very fun game. It's definitely not for the faint of heart.
It does, yeah, seem a little high variance. But I mean, I guess if you're short stack though, so I like deep stack, be careful playing aces and kings and ace king because the dynamics of the board change. If you have people with 20 out straight draws, like the aces is gonna wither, right, in strength really quickly. But if you're short stacked, I suppose you should, like 10 bigs, it's like those are the type of hands you're looking to get all in with, right? Or actually, are you also looking for, like a 6, 7, 8, 9 double suited or something? Is that like a hand? Is that a stronger hand to go all in with?
Yeah, those hands actually is better just to realize if you're short. you want to see flop, and if you don't flop anything good,
I see.
if when you start getting deeper, they still pretty strong. You still want to call three bet and see flop. And it's a lot of opponents in PLO when they new, or they often just three betting aces and no other hands. And that's a big
me.
mistake as well.
I do that.
Sometimes it just naturally, people just three bet aces only and not value as much, like, high card rundowns, for example. Yeah, so oftentimes you can range them, like, especially like four bet people, like only four bet aces. And yeah, you just kind of know that they have aces. Once you see the flop, basically, you can know pretty good idea of your equity. You flop like a pair and a gutter with like three side cards, you're doing well in equity, you're flipping. So it's a lot of reason for people to like put money in the pot, just with the pure equity of the hand. So yeah, ace is not very as OP for sure. And also like cards, just for pre-flop, you don't want to have hands that are having like three of the same suit, for example. That's kind of blocking your own outs, they say.
Okay.
So yeah, if you're drawing to the flush, you are actually blocking one of the flush out. So for example, trips as well. Trips in your hand is not as good. You can't make a set as often. Definitely not quads unless you like have quad aces and you want to just get spicy and get in there and use the blocker. Yeah, so play tight pre-flop. Even tight in PLO, you can still have a lot of hands that you can play. But when you first playing PLO, just trying to play hands with those good values, like big cards, big suits, connected hands. Don't play any hand. Just don't think you are playing 6 different hold'ems hand, even though you are. Yeah, I mean, I see players play a lot of like hands that like just low pairs. You just get cooler so often in PLO. You set over set happens so often, so you don't want to play those small pairs and those like low suit cards. Yeah, it would make your life a lot easier post flop. Oh, another thing that I think is very important in PLO is the rule that players use to calculate the outs in the hand. In Hold'em, we use this like two times and 4 times shortcut rules. It does not apply to PLO as precisely. That's because you do have 4 cards in your hand, so there are less unknown cards. When the flop comes out, 7 cards. So there's 45 unknown cards. Instead of in Hold'em, it's 47 unknown cards. So when you calculate it out, that rule doesn't apply as much. And so you want to make sure you get a more precise number, because sometimes it could make a difference in you calling the turn or not. I see some seasoned PLO players still uses that rule. I'm very surprised, because they just translate from Hold'em, but it's not really correct. The difference is pretty fine. But in some cases, when you get to the turn, for example, it's a bit different when it's like less cards. I think that's the main tips I have. And just keep in mind, in PLO, you just always want to draw to the nuts. That's kind of helped you. It's kind of form your strategy, and always think about what you're drawing to. It's a drawing game, unless you have the nuts and you're just trying to like protect your hand, or even when you have the nuts, sometimes you need to be careful of the board changing. But in general, you want to draw to the nuts. That's the key. Yeah.
That is key. You're our key.
Yeah, I think there's not many materials out there to learn PLO. I would like to just shout out to PLO Mastermind. That's the site I use to get into the training, and they have a solver as well, actually. So you can practice hands. They have a great collection of videos, and just learning the game systematically can help you save money a lot when you first enter the game. So
is it free content, or is it like a paid service?
It's a paid site, but they do have a lot of free content on the YouTube channel as well, for you just kind of get some samples of it. Jaden is a great friend of mine, and I think he's a great coach, and you have a bunch of great coaches as well on the site.
Oh, nice.
Really nice to have a place where you can learn it.
Do you have a referral code?
Yes, I have a link for it, so maybe I can send it to you.
Okay. So I will put the link up here on the screen after I get it from Key, and I'll paste it in here. So Key, this was amazing. Thank you so much for coming on. Obviously, it's very clear your passion and excitement for PLO from the way that you're talking about it, but just the way that you're describing it sounds like a super fun game. I think it's a great, change up for no limit hold'em players and the very dry 2-card game that we play these days. But thank you so much for coming on the show, man.
No problem. Yeah, I'm glad to always bring more players to PLO. And if you want to get your feet wet, there's PLO from 1-3 to 5-5 to 10-20, 40 at Hustlers every day. So come through, say hi, let's play some pots.
Thanks, Key. Yeah, if you guys are in LA, definitely go see Key down at the Hustler Casino. Thanks a lot, buddy.